So in today's lesson, we will pick up where we left off, and I think in the last lesson I mentioned I would do max and min. I'll do max and I'll leave min for you, and we'll do max now. So this is where we left off. I'm going to go into the grades class, and we're going to add a method called max, and max will return the largest value in the array scores. So our return value will be an int. We're going to return a member of the scores array. So the array is an array of ints. We're going to return an int. I'm calling it max. We don't have to send it anything. And we're just going to we're going to go through the array from start to finish, and we're going to look for the maximum value. So I'm going to start with a dummy value, which I'll call biggest, or maybe I'll just call it big, but biggest will work. And I'm going to say biggest equals the scores sub 1, sub 0, the first score. So score sub 0 is the first score in the array as I look through it from 0 through the size of the array. And we're assuming that the array has some size, that it actually does exist. And we can put a safeguard for that in prior to this. But let's just talk about how do we find the max and how do we return it. So right now, if I've only looked at the first score, that's the biggest score so far. I could have called this biggest so far, but I'm just going to call it biggest. And it's equal to score sub 0. Then I'm going to go through the array. I'm going to go through the entire array, and we'll use this piece of code right here for that. But I don't need to start at 0. I already looked at 0. I'm going to start at 1 and go through all the rest of the scores in the array. And what I'm going to do is if the score I'm presently looking at, which is scores sub I, if that score is greater than biggest, well, if that's the case, then that means biggest wasn't the biggest, and that the scores sub I is now the biggest. So if that's the case, I'm going to just set biggest equal to the score we just looked at, which was bigger than biggest, scores sub I. So let's talk about that again. This for loop here is going to take us through the whole loop from position 1 through the end, because we already took care of 0, position 0. And if at any time the score we look at is bigger than the one we're presently calling biggest, then biggest becomes the score we just noticed was bigger than biggest. So the only thing we have left to do after, let me back this up so this makes sense. My for loop starts and ends here. If this is a true statement, it does just this line right here. And now we want to return the largest value, which is biggest. And that should take care of everything here. So max is a simple little routine that looks through the entire array, picking out the largest one. And I'll leave writing min for you. I'm sure you can handle that. Let's compile that, see if everything's good. And we'll go back to the tester, and we'll see if we can test that. Let's test it on the last set of scores. So we'll take period 4 dot max, and that will return to us the largest value. But we need to put it somewhere. So we can either print it out or store it in a dummy. I'm going to print it right here. So I'm just going to say system dot out dot print, and I'll make it print line so it returns after it prints. And I'm going to print max equals, and we'll concatenate that with what period 4 dot max returns. And we need a parentheses at the end of that print line. Let's compile that and see if it likes that. So let's close that out. Let's check it out and see if it works. So there were the scores. The maximum score we got here was 31. So that seems to work. You can test it for some of the other, and you don't want to just test it one time either. When you're testing to see if your code works, you need to test it for a few times before you want to believe that it actually is working. Okay, so that's it for max. You can write min. And if I go back to a silly joke I thought of when I was using the word biggest, I saw a woman who was a big-time character on Wheel of Fortune a couple weeks ago, and she said she was also a amateur comedian. And Pat Sajak there is going to tell a joke. So her joke was, who's bigger, Mr. Bigger or Mr. Bigger's baby? And the answer was, it's Mr. Bigger's baby because Mr. Bigger's baby is a little bigger. See you next time.